Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Anssi Kainvainen. I work at the Research Data Services group here at CSC. And yeah, next topic is the Fairdata services that are soon up and coming. I don't know how much you want to hear about why data management is important. I get this hunch that most people sort of are aware of the issues. But please ask me if you want to know more. Then just go through the Fairdata services, and at the end we'll look at some frequently asked questions related to the schedule and so forth. Yeah, Fairdata, as the name implies, tries to answer the challenges or goals set by the FAIR principles. The goal is to make research data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In practice, you can look at the slide and see what each of these goals mean. Some of them are very practical and easy things to handle, just to keep in your mind. And the Fairdata services are built in the sense that they try to make the workflow for the researcher easy enough to use so they can sort of reach these goals just by using the service, or just keep the researcher reminded about these goals. One of the key technologies here, as was mentioned by Chris earlier, is the person identifier. That is perhaps the most important single thing within the data management or research data management, is that there needs to be a way to be uniquely and reliably find the actual data you're referring to, whether it's your publication or funding application or whatever. We need to be sure that the data you are referring to in your research, that is the actual data you are referring to, not some other version of it or something with a similar name or whatever. In practice, that persistent identifier is the link to the original description about the data set, and whatever files and help text and licensing information and configuration of whatever is included there. One important aspect to think about when you're doing your research is data management plans, and when you're planning to use these services, is to look at what kind of data you have on your hands. We've been trying to model different types of data that can be used for research. The first one is the kind of what we call the operational data. Data that is being created already somewhere that's not originally meant for research as is, or academic research, but it still can be useful. For example, weather data that's been collected by weather stations for purposes of informing the general public, or maybe information that's available in social media, but it's not designed to be research data as is. Or some statistical data about the society and so forth. The problem with that kind of data is that it can be changing a lot all the time. The formats might not be that standard and so forth. And it's somewhat similar to this kind of generic research data in the middle column, which is both of these can be changing a lot. They can be dynamic data, they can be daily or even per second updated. And there's no clear start and end to this data. It just keeps going on. It can grow by the minute or in yearly time series or so forth. But still, it can be very useful for research. And on the other hand, we have these clearly defined research data sets. They have a beginning and an end, and once they've been published, they are done. They can be reused, of course, but you shouldn't be changing the contents that much. Or if you're changing the contents, then you're referring to another version and actually another data set in that sense. These are the kind of things that I'm perhaps most familiar with researchers they can be thought of as papers and that describe the contents and so forth. And the challenge is Fairdata might be most suitable for describing the right-hand side, where we are referring to how to store data sets as they are finished. But of course, we aim to support changing data as well. But this is something to keep in mind when you're planning your data management. This is another picture trying to describe the same situation. Data that can be gathered or selected from a changing source can be then turned into an actual static data set. But the important thing is to plan ahead. Plan what you want to do in your research project, what your research question sets, and then choose the services based on that. Take care of the legal and contractual issues, and especially if you have sensitive data or some other issue that take into consideration the ethical questions. And there's a list of links to different places where you can find more information and more tools for this planning stage. But let's go on to the actual Fairdata services. Fairdata services are a bunch of services that can be used separately, but they all are part of the same chain of research or the research process. IDA is the place where we store data, the actual files and the bits. Kuvain is the service where we describe what a data set is. We can refer to stuff in IDA, but that's the place where we actually select files and describe the contents. And once they're published, the datasets can be found in Etsin. And then there is the digital preservation solution, Fairdata Pass, which is meant for certain datasets that are deemed to have enough importance nationally or to the organization. And they are meant to be preserved for the following generations, so to speak. Of course, in the background, we have supporting services, the actual metadata repository where the descriptions are, and then solutions for authentication. Pass services have been discussed a lot. Some of you might be familiar with the cultural heritage pass services that have been in production for many years already. And the big thing here is to sort of catch that there might be some challenges in somehow figuring out whether this data set is actually about cultural heritage or research data, because cultural heritage materials can be used for research as well. But from the legal point of view or contractual point of view, all the kind of research data sets that are supposed to be handled by memory organizations, they belong to the cultural heritage part. And then the research, the purpose of the use of the research, purpose of the use of the data set, that sort of defines in which category you put them in. And if that data set ends up in digital preservation, they actually, on the bit level preservation, go into the same PAS solution. And as I said, the basic workflow for Fairdata services is, first you have a nice data management plan, and you do your research, and you create some outputs like actual data files and so forth. That's the point where you put the stuff in IDA. You can organize them there. In IDA, there's this separation into the staging area or organizing area where you can move things around and organize them into folders. And as time goes by and you get more analysis results or whatever, you can put them in one place. And once you're comfortable that, okay, now this is done. Now this is a data set I want to maintain as an intact object, you make the decision of freezing that data set. Freezing those files. And that is an important point for the researcher. That is actually a promise from the researcher. I won't be touching these anymore. So when somebody refers to those files, they need to be sure that they are unchanged. Of course, if you make mistakes, you can delete those files and they stop existing, and you can replace them with another, let's say, another version of those files. But there's the big difference. You won't be able to refer to them as the previous one. There's always the IDA system takes care that we ensure that the end user and the researchers who create the data, they are always aware that what's the difference between this file and that file. Is this the original one or is this a new version? And that's where the identifiers come into picture. So once you've had a bunch of files and you feel comfortable that now I want to publish this, you go to Kuvain, pick your project files, describe them, and then you click publish, and then they become visible to the other people in Etsin. And Etsin is the place where you can find these research datasets regardless of field of science and whatever. And Etsin is the place you can actually download the files if they are meant to be downloadable there. And for some datasets, the end results can also be put to the digital preservation, as I mentioned. The research data bus or Fairdata bus consists of a packaging service, which actually does this technical part. And then there's a management view where the organizations, or perhaps you or perhaps some other body in your organization, can see what has been put to pass. And sometimes the pass process can take a while, so they can see at which stage they are in that process. Technically, as I mentioned, there's a front-end part, Kuvain, Etsin, and Fairdata bus management view. And on the back end, we have the packaging service and bus solution and metadata repository Metax, and then the authentication and authorization infrastructure. Then to the actual services in slightly more detail. Research data storage service, IDA, the quotas are granted to the projects by your organizations. Ministry of Education has given each research organization in Finland a certain quota, and of course they can apply for more quota. But it's up to the organizations to decide which of their projects they will give this IDA quota and how much. And CSC actually doesn't want to be involved, and we shouldn't be involved in that because it's the autonomy of the organization to take care of these things, how they fit in your research profile and resources and so forth. Currently, we have something around 236 active projects in IDA, and if you count the bits they have stored, it's slightly over 600 terabytes, and this is daily changing. I think this data point is from somewhere in December. And the links provided in the slide here, you can take a look at what the quotas are. The first link is dated to summer, so it's slightly outdated, but still you should be.
It's still organizational quotas are not often changed by the ministry, so they are that's the latest.
Okay, good. And then the contact persons in each of your organizations should be available from that list. And I think you are aware pretty much who are the contact people for Fairdata services in your organizations. And if you don't know, and if you want to be, please contact us so we can update the list. So the basic functionality, as I described earlier, is that we provide a user interface for the researchers to manage their data. Much of the functionality is the same as in the previous version of IDA. There's a lot of changes that have taken place in the background. The whole architecture has changed into Nextcloud based, and but the main changes are the changes in the process of handling the staging part and the frozen area. That's a big difference, and I already explained what is the promise of this immutability about. And once you have files stored in IDA, they are available for the other Fairdata services to use in description or download or so forth, depending on how you decide to share them, of course. And IDA is one viable route of getting your datasets or your researchers' datasets into the PAS digital preservation. Of course, there are other routes to digital preservation as well. And one of the things we have put a lot of effort in is making the new item more usable than the old one. The user interface has been improved quite a lot. And here's a quick screenshot of what the current IDA looks like. And you can go there, the service is in production, so you can go there and try it out. You probably have your own test projects available, and if you don't, you can apply for one, because you can make the decision in your organization about using the quota. And if you want more details about how to use them, we have a couple of demo videos in YouTube already available. And you can ask Subi for more details today. And Kuvain is the next component of the part of this research process. That's the place where we describe define and describe the actual data sets, what the actual data is about, the content. And then there's a lot of important information about who is the author, who has created this data set, who has been taking part in analysis or cleaning up the data, and whatever stakeholders are related to this data set. We can provide you links to the actual files, so you can select them there, add them to the data set, and then it's up to the researcher to describe what the user rights and other licensing issues are related to that data set. And of course, the versioning, as I mentioned, if you change something, you can either, if you change the files, it's already automatic that you will be getting a new version identifier. You can link these different versions to each other. And you can make references to other data sets. For example, if you want to have a collection of data sets related to one topic, or if it's time series kind of information, they are separate data sets, but you can combine them under an umbrella data set also. And of course, a lot of information about the provenance. It might take many years that different changes are happening to the data set. And if the data is managed by the project, and when the project ends after 5 years and the university wants to take over, or another project wants to take over, then it's up to the researchers to come to the agreement. Okay, now this data set can be handled by the other partner. So they don't, once the original people have sort of stopped working on it, then it doesn't have to mean that then it's sort of abandoned. It still should be made usable to the other people. Kuvain uses the same data model as the Metax tool, because Metax is the storage of the descriptions or the repository, and you can look at the data model in tietomallit.suomi.fi. And the metadata is available in machine-readable form as well. You can take a look at the datasite JSON version straight from Kuvain, or you can access the Metax API once it's in production. This is a slightly older screenshot of Kuvain development version. Currently, Kuvain is not in production yet. We hope that it's available in sometime this year, hopefully earlier than later. And one thing I forgot to mention, all the Fairdata services are provided by the Ministry of Education. They pay the bills, and CSC takes care of the production or hosting of these services and development of these services. But Kuvain has been developed by the National Library. And once you have published your dataset, it's available in Etsin. Etsin is quite familiar to you perhaps from previous years, and the new version has been changed as well. The background technology has changed, and the user interface has been developed further as well. And it's a tool for searching and finding data sets. And some of those data sets are the ones that the Fairdata is the original or the master source for. And some of the data sets are harvested from other sources. Currently, we harvest from Kielipankki, National Language Bank of Finland. And then we have data sets from the Finnish Social Science Data Archive at Tampere. And then the Finnish Environmental Institute, Syke. And others are being added as they come available, and we try to go. It takes sometimes a bit more work because we need to make sure that we map the data models together and that they follow the same, or the processes of managing the data sets are compatible. And the point here is that we want to avoid describing data sets over and over again. The goal is to you only have to describe your data set once, and then it's findable in multiple sources. And if you have something available in Etsin, it's already crawled by Google, for example, and it should be pretty much visible from the regular internet searches. And we've been planning to provide or further harvest or provide our services, data sets to other similar services like the Zenodo and Fairdata in the future as well. So basically, Etsin provides a landing page for each of the data sets in addition to the actual search tool, and download links for the actual files. And you can have dataset descriptions in Etsin and Fairdata regardless of where the actual data is stored. The data can be in your own organizational repository or some other place. We just take care that the researchers add the links to the source. And there will be a tool for managing access to those datasets, because not all datasets can be openly available, but this resource management tool is in development currently. And here's a brief screenshot of the Etsin currently. And once you start finding datasets there, the landing pages will look like that. Basic descriptions and descriptions of how to access the actual data. And the demo version is already available. You can go try it out. It mostly has harvested descriptions there, and the contents might change daily, but we will publish this once Kuvain is ready. Until that, the old Etsin is the production version. And then the digital preservation of Fairdata PAS. The point of PAS is that datasets should be remaining understandable and usable even in a long term. I mean, the personnel will change both in the research group, and the personnel will change here at CSC where we provide these services, and the organizations might change. For example, if you take a look at what is happening at Tampere, there will be some reorganizations, and of course they will provide their services, but the supporting structure for long-term preservation needs to be taken care of even despite these things. And the technologies will change. Currently we are storing data in certain kinds of disks and tapes, and we are storing data in certain file formats and so forth, but they will change in time. Some technologies will become obsolete, but the digital preservation will take care of updating that data to the new technologies. But the dataset should be self-explanatory. The original people who created the data and know in their heads that what it was about and how it was described and what kind of technologies were used, it said those people can't be referred to anymore. So the descriptions must be of high quality enough for other people to understand even after 50 years or so forth. The actual data set has to change intact and compliant to the specifications. That starts from the very beginning when you ingest the data into digital preservation. And the means for that are, of course, standards and so forth. And there always has to be a responsible party to datasets in digital preservation. There always has to be some organization who can be referred to if somebody asks about, let's say, GDPR issues about the data or whatever. And the important thing to sort of realize is that preservation is actually active work. It's not just some slice of disk somewhere that's very that has very many copies. The actual preservation is the work that people do when they take care of the data and migrate it to other platforms and file formats and so forth. Much of this work is based on standardization. BUS is based on standard technologies, file formats, and so forth, and the standards are nationally agreed to. They're not just something CSE invited, but many partners in Finland and of course abroad are taking care of these standards. And the datasets need to be described and organized in a very strict manner. And we need to take care of the reuse even after a longer time than any individual person can provide. So there needs to be that party that can make these decisions on a long time span. The actual specification of technical specs and guides can be found behind this website in digitalpreservation.fi. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of collaboration. It's not something CSE only does, but it's a collaborative effort nationally and internationally. So how to get your data sets into digital preservation? There are selection criteria. Currently the criteria are divided into two sets. The first one is whatever data set is deemed important enough for the research organization. And the other criteria is what kind of data sets are important enough in a national level. But of course, these criteria are still changing a bit. We don't yet have the contract for BUS services signed. And even after it's signed, there will probably, the discussion between the organization and ministry will continue. And I think a few of you have participated in these discussions. Currently, there are 4 projects of getting datasets into BUS, research BUS, Fairdata BUS, accelerator laboratory data from Jyväskylä University, and then geophysics stuff from Oulu University, and atmospheric science data from Helsinki University, and some data from Geological Survey of Finland. I don't know the details of that one. And the management view is already available there. The access is slightly limited, and since the actual preservation work is only starting now, there won't be that much interesting things to look at. But after a couple of years, I think many of your organizations will have something available in BUS. And that management view will be the place where you can see where the process is. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this criteria. If these are familiar stuff, please say and we can go forward. And if you want to discuss what the criteria should be like, please contact Ministry of Education and whoever in your organization are party to these discussions. They are being refined currently, and at the end we hope to also automate these or make the decision making much more easier than it currently is. And another side note here is that if the dataset is meant to be archived and preserved as is defined by the archival law, then it should be transferred to the National Archives ownership, and then they take care of it, and then it's put to the Cultural Heritage BUS instead of Research BUS. Yeah, and then the nationally significant criteria are, of course, that the dataset, if it's produced by research infrastructure that's on the academy's roadmap or some other nationally or internationally significant infrastructure, then it could be selected. If it's used in wide collaboration or used in publications that are significant enough, or the resources used to produce this data are significant, then that's another criteria. And of course, there will be a minimum quality set for this kind of data. Then going to the actual repository, Metax isn't a service that the end user or the researchers usually deal with. It's mostly in the background, unless they are willing to use the API for handling data, metadata descriptions. Metax is the glue between Fairdata services. If you store stuff in IDA and freeze them, then they will be available for the other services to use through Metax. And whenever you publish a data set and it's given a persistent identifier, Metax is the place where it's technically handled, and it takes care of the logic that whenever there's a new version and so forth. And Metax is the place where you can find the actual linkages between data sets. Metax is also the place where we have the reference data like ontologies and other, whatever is handled in the data metadata descriptions in a way that it's not just free text. Then all those are available in Metax, and we hope that in the future we can sort of spread these reference data into a wider use. So if you have research or some kind of metadata system in your own organization and you want to describe things in a compatible or interoperable manner, we perhaps can provide these reference data for you as well. The API is already available in some sense. You can look at the descriptions or guide of how to use the API already. There will be some small changes, so it's not yet available for users. This is perhaps aimed more for certain specific users who want to automate the process of data publication, or if we want to integrate services more, then the API comes into picture. Here's the same stuff in a more visual manner. This is the slide I like to scare people with. This is what the data model looks like when you go to tietomallit.suomi.fi. It's a technical data model, so actually it's much more simpler to use for the end user's viewpoint, but it gives you an idea of how rich and how complex descriptions it can support. And the nice part about this service is that you can interactively go around there and see into which standards each of these metadata components are mapped into. And so if you have plans to integrate these services, that is a good place to start when you want to look at how your data models are compatible with ours. But basically, the descriptions are very simple. We have a file storage, then we have a project within that storage, and that project has a directories, and then in the directories we have files. And on the description side, we have data catalogs, like there's a catalog for IDA stuff, and there's a catalog for Syke stuff or any other repository we have harvested. It makes it slightly more manageable to have these as separate catalogs. So where we know where the sources are, and if there are some changes or differences in the metadata models, some might be more richer than the others, then it's easy to track from that viewpoint. Then we have the records and data sets, and the data sets can either link into these files and directories at IDA, or they can link to other remote sources. But that's the main content of a data set description. Then go into the frequently asked questions. The new IDA, Metax, and new Etsin are already in production. Kuvain will be deployed later. It will be put to production this year. The new Etsin and Fairdata Bus can be fully utilized only after Kuvain is functional, because we won't be able to describe datasets in the new Etsin, whereas in the old Etsin the descriptions were possible. And Fairdata Bus will require the features of the Kuvain to make it more manageable. I mean, we can put stuff into Fairdata Bus currently already, but it it's slightly more manual work. We have to provide the dataset descriptions in a manual way instead of using this graphical user interface or web user interface of Kuvain. But during this transition phase, now that the where we are currently, the files that we can store in IDA, they cannot be linked to datasets in Etsin. You can still describe your datasets in the old Etsin, but you can put the actual file links referring to the new IDA. But if you have some researchers that have really strong needs, then you can contact us and we can figure out if we can do something under the hood, so to speak. Of course, we can share the files from IDA through these kind of temporary share links, but those are temporary by design because part of this process of managing this data, it's very important that we are sure that we create persistent identifiers only to datasets that are managed and frozen and linked to descriptions that tell you what this data is about. You don't want to link people to the actual files, but to the descriptions where they can find the files from. Yeah, the Metax API can be opened or will be opened. The exact date hasn't been set yet. We are still fine-tuning some features there. Another big question, of course, when we think about data management services, how to get access to these. Fairdata services are open to all higher education institutions and state research institutes in Finland. I mean, universities and polytechnics and research institutes. The contract negotiations are still ongoing. I think we are very close to getting signed contracts, but I can't provide you with a date. And one of the important part of Fairdata services to actually work is you. I mean, CSC can't provide end user support in the scale that it would be enough. And it's not only a research question, it's also about how you want to profile these services in your organizations. Each university has slightly different set of services and slightly different policies of handling research and research data. So it's up to you to sort of figure out what is the best thing and what kind of instructions you want to give your users that might differ from other organizations. And as I mentioned earlier, the IDA project quotas are decided by you or your organizations, even though the big picture quotas are decided by the Ministry of Education. All the preservation of Fairdata Pass deployments are negotiated through Ministry. And of course, this might change slightly. The criteria are still being discussed. Basically, anybody with a Haka identity can describe datasets in Kuvain, even if they wouldn't be able to store any files in IDA. So if you have a Haka identity, you can describe a dataset even if the actual data itself is lying on the shelf or in some other repository. We will be adding more identifying methods like Virtu later, but it's not only a technical limitation of what identifying technologies can be used, but it's also about maintaining this, let's say, trustworthy back organization who can take care of published datasets if something happens to the researcher, if they decide to change careers or move abroad or something, if they leave the dataset alone. And it's very important there's always an organization behind them who can take care of things. If there's a published dataset and somebody asks, can I use this? And the original researcher doesn't answer anymore, then there's always some organization in the background who can take care of the discussions from that point onwards. The terms of use and policies are available in our website. Of course, they are still pending to some changes depending on what the contract will be like. And we have this Eduni wiki page that is basically aimed at for you. We hope we can encourage this kind of peer support, and if you have any issues you want to discuss with each other, share your best practices or whatever, this is the place where we're planning to sort of collect this kind of information and provide a platform for discussion. We won't be creating any new discussion groups or such, because there already exist many, like the Tuha network and so forth in Finland, but this is more like a technical platform for having this discussion and sharing material. Maybe you want to draft your guidelines together without providing them to the end users yet. One thing we often are asked about is the international collaboration, because most of these services are aimed for the Finnish researchers, but still international collaboration is possible. Each project in IDA must have a responsible project manager who can then give access to other people in their project. The responsibilities and guidelines are described behind that web link. And we can always openly share dataset description through the descriptions, that if your dataset is openly available, then anybody can download it there. If it's managed through REMS or whatever, then they have to identify, and then it gets more complicated for international users. You can of course always share your data through these temporary links, but then they are file references, and they are only temporary. Dataset visibility, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important that we can make this kind of harvesting possible and get as much visibility to research datasets as possible. And Google is crawling those descriptions as we speak, and they can be findable. It doesn't need identification or login from any user to see what's available in Etsin. But the important part is to take care of the legal and ethical necessities, especially when we are talking international cases, especially outside the European Union. We have no means of actually verifying whether the licensing descriptions you've given or the researchers have given are valid or not. And yeah, we are considering providing this kind of let's say back-end data transfers between services, like between Fairdata and UDAT, for example, but currently they are not available as ready processes, but they can be made manually case by case if you have strong needs. And sensitive data is also a hot topic. Basically, this means any kind of information that identifies or is gathered from a person. It can be biometric data or medical information or social support information or data with IP restrictions, but it's still meant to be shared for some limited reasons. But sensitive data doesn't mean that it shouldn't be fair data. It should be findable, accessible, and interoperable and reusable still. It just takes slightly more. You need to take more things into consideration. And currently, IDA is not meant for sensitive data storage. Basically, if the data is anonymized well enough, then it's okay. There are some guidelines by the Social Science Archive of Finland for that. And it's up to the researchers to take care of this. I mean, there's no way for us to verify that whether the data they store is sensitive or not. The coming Tiedonhallintalaki, I don't know if there's a proper English translation for that law, but once it's done already or in action, it will probably give us more clear guidance how can we handle or how should we handle sensitive data in IDA. But that's something that will happen in the future. But still, as I mentioned, if you have sensitive data, it's still worthwhile to describe and publish that description through Kuva and Metax and Etsin. And even only just for your own use, it's still much easier to find it and understand it 15 years later. There are other sensitive data services like EPO that we have been talking about earlier today. And the REMS tool, there are different implementations of the REMS tool, which is meant for handling these applications and giving accesses. But that's not for the actual data, storing of the data. It's management of the process of giving and applying for permits. And Elixir and other certain services that are meant for certain fields of science will provide more specified or more focused services for sensitive data. And Fairdata will be auditioned if you worry about these information security issues, and this will come into more big. They will be more important in the future as this sensitiveness issue arises. Thank you. That's basically what I have to say about Fairdata currently.